My name is Mike, and I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Austin, Texas. Our family was the picture of stability and love. At least, that's what I thought. My wife Karen and I have been married for 15 years. We have 2 kids, Emily and Jake, who are 12 and 10 respectively. Our house is a modest 2-story with a big backyard where the kids love to play. We've got a dog named Max, and life, for the most part, seemed perfect. Karen works as a marketing executive for a local company, and I run a small tech startup. Our days are filled with the usual chaos of school runs, work commitments, and trying to squeeze in family time whenever we can. The weekends are our sanctuary, a chance to unwind and reconnect. Saturday mornings are reserved for family breakfasts, and Sundays are for lazy afternoons at the park. We were the typical suburban family. Our neighbors knew us, and we participated in community events. Our social circle was tight-knit, with barbecues and birthday parties that brought everyone together. It was a life I cherished, and I believed Karen did too. Our home was a place of laughter and love. The walls were adorned with family photos, each telling a story of a happy moment. From the kids' first steps to family vacations, our memories were captured in those frames. I loved Karen deeply, and I thought our bond was unbreakable. But as they say, life can change in an instant. Little did I know that beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect life, there was a storm brewing, one that would shatter everything I held dear. It all started with little things. At first I brushed them off, thinking they were just figments of my imagination or products of a stressful work life. Karen started coming home later than usual, often citing work emergencies or late meetings. She used to call me if she was going to be late, but those calls had dwindled down to almost nothing. When I asked about it, she'd wave it off, saying her workload had increased, and she didn't want to disturb me. She also started spending more time on her phone. Karen had always been active on social media, but now it seemed she was constantly texting or checking her messages. When I asked her who she was talking to, she'd give vague answers, mentioning work colleagues or friends I'd never heard of before. Her phone, once casually left around the house, was now always within her reach, and she had even set a password on it. The most unsettling change was in our intimacy. Karen and I had always shared a strong physical connection, but over the past few months, she had become distant. Our nights together became less frequent, and when we did make love, it felt mechanical, devoid of the passion we once shared. I tried to talk to her about it, but she always had an excuse. Stress, fatigue, headaches. The turning point came one Saturday afternoon. I was working in the garage when I noticed Karen had left her phone on the kitchen counter. It buzzed with a message, and out of curiosity, I glanced at it. It was from someone named Paul, and the message read, "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing." My heart sank. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Who was Paul? What did he mean by "last night was amazing"? I tried to rationalize it, thinking it might be a harmless message from a friend, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. I decided to confront Karen about it. That evening, after the kids were in bed, I asked her about the message. She looked startled, her eyes widening in a way that confirmed my worst fears. But then she quickly composed herself and brushed it off, saying Paul was just a colleague and they had been discussing a project late into the night. Her explanation seemed rehearsed, too perfect. Days turned into weeks and my suspicions only grew. Karen's behavior became increasingly erratic. She would leave the house at odd hours, claiming she needed to clear her head or run errands that seemed unnecessary. One night she came home smelling of alcohol and perfume, a combination that was unlike her. When I questioned her, she became defensive and irritable, accusing me of being paranoid. My mind was a whirlwind of doubts and fears. I wanted to believe her, to trust her, but the signs were becoming too hard to ignore. I started noticing other things. Unfamiliar receipts in her purse, sudden changes in her appearance, and a newfound interest in going out with friends she had never mentioned before. I confided in my best friend Steve, who had been through a rough divorce a few years back. He listened patiently, nodding as I recounted the changes in Karen's behavior. "Mike, I hate to say it, but it sounds like she might be cheating," he said gently. His words hit me like a ton of bricks. The idea that Karen could be unfaithful was something I had never considered, but now it seemed like the only explanation that made sense. Determined to find out the truth, I decided to do some investigating of my own. I started paying closer attention to Karen's actions, looking for any clues that might confirm my suspicions. I checked her phone when she wasn't around, searched her email for anything out of the ordinary, and even followed her once or twice when she left the house unexpectedly. Each piece of evidence I found pointed to the same conclusion. Karen was hiding something from me. The late-night texts, the secretive phone calls, the mysterious disappearances, it all added up to one thing. But I needed more than suspicions. I needed proof. And so, I found myself in a position I never thought I'd be in, playing detective in my own marriage, driven by a desperate need to uncover the truth and confront the woman I thought I knew better than anyone else. Last week I had to go on a business trip to Houston, just a couple of hours away from Austin. It was a crucial meeting with potential investors, and despite the turmoil in my personal life, I had to focus. Karen seemed indifferent about my trip. She didn't even bother to see me off as she usually did, a further sign of the growing rift between us. I arrived in Houston and checked into my hotel, trying to push thoughts of Karen and our troubles out of my mind. The meeting went well, and I was feeling a bit more optimistic about the future. That evening, I grabbed dinner alone at a nearby restaurant, hoping the change of scenery would help me clear my head. Around 9 p.m., just as I was settling back into my hotel room, my phone rang. It was Emily. I answered immediately, my heart racing at the thought that something might be wrong. "Dad," she said, her voice shaky, "Mom came home with a man and they're in the bedroom." My world stopped. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. "What? What do you mean, sweetheart?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady for her sake. "I heard them, Dad. I was downstairs doing my homework when I saw them come in. They didn't see me. They went straight to your bedroom and I heard them through the door. I'm scared, Dad. What should I do?" A mix of rage and despair washed over me. My mind raced, trying to process what Emily was saying. Karen had brought a stranger into our home, into our bed, while our children were in the house. The betrayal was worse than I had imagined. I had suspected she was cheating, but hearing it confirmed by my own daughter was unbearable. "Emily, listen to me," I said, trying to sound calm. "I need you to go to your room and lock the door. Take Jake with you and stay there. I'll be home as soon as I can. Don't open the door for anyone except me, okay?" "Okay, Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. I hung up and immediately called Steve. He answered on the second ring. "Mike, what's up?" "Steve, I need a favor. Karen is at home with another man, and the kids are there. I need you to go over and get them out of the house. I'm in Houston and can't get back right away." "Jesus, Mike, I'm on my way. I'll call you when I get there," he said without hesitation. I threw my things into my suitcase, my hands shaking with anger. I checked out of the hotel and raced to my car, driving back to Austin as fast as I could. The 2-hour drive felt like an eternity. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, anger at Karen, worry for my kids, and a deep sense of betrayal. Steve called me about halfway through the drive. "Mike, I've got the kids. They're with me at my place. Emily was pretty shaken up, but they're safe. What do you want to do?" "Thank you, Steve. Just keep them there for now. I'll be back in Austin in about an hour. I need to deal with Karen," I replied, my voice tight with rage. I finally pulled into our driveway, my heart pounding. The house was dark except for a single light in the living room. I took a deep breath and walked up to the front door, unlocking it quietly. The house was eerily silent. I made my way upstairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. I could hear muffled sounds coming from our bedroom. My rage boiled over. I threw open the door, and there they were, Karen and some stranger caught in the act. Karen screamed and scrambled to cover herself, while the man looked like a deer caught in headlights. "What the fuck is going on here?" I roared, my voice echoing through the room. "Get the hell out of my house!" The man grabbed his clothes and fled without a word, leaving Karen sitting on the bed trembling. I could see the fear in her eyes, but at that moment, I didn't care. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. "Mike, I can explain," she started, but I cut her off. "Explain? Explain what, Karen? That you brought a stranger into our home, into our bed, while our kids were downstairs? Do you have any idea what you've done?" My voice cracked with a mixture of fury and pain. "Please, Mike, it's not what it looks like," she pleaded, but her words rang hollow. "Not what it looks like. Emily called me, Karen. She heard everything. How could you do this to us, to our family?" I felt tears of anger and hurt welling up in my eyes. Karen started crying. her tears doing nothing to soften my anger. "I'm sorry, Mike. I was lonely, and he was just someone I met. It didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything. You betrayed me, Karen. You betrayed our children. Get out. Get out of this house now," I said, my voice cold and final. She tried to argue, but I wouldn't hear it. "I'll pack some things and go to a hotel," she said, her voice breaking. "Fine. But when you leave, don't bother coming back," I replied, turning my back on her and walking out of the room. I went downstairs and sat on the couch, my mind numb. I could hear Karen moving around upstairs, packing her things. After what felt like an eternity, she came down, a small suitcase in hand. "Mike, I'm so sorry," she said one last time, but I didn't respond. I couldn't even look at her. She left, and the silence in the house was deafening. I buried my face in my hands, the weight of the night's events crashing down on me. How had it come to this? How had our life, our family, been torn apart so completely? I knew I had to call Emily and Jake, to reassure them that everything would be okay. But as I picked up the phone, I realized that nothing would ever be the same again. The woman I had loved and trusted had shattered our world, and the road ahead was uncertain and filled with pain. The next morning I barely slept, the events of the previous night playing on a loop in my mind. I had to face Karen again, but this time it would be on my terms. I needed to understand why she had done this, how she could betray our family so deeply. I knew I couldn't let my anger consume me, but I also knew that this confrontation was unavoidable. I called Steve to check on the kids. They were understandably upset and confused. "They're doing okay, Mike. They're worried about you," Steve said. "I told them you'd come by later today." "Thanks, Steve. I need to handle something first," I replied, steeling myself for what was to come. Karen had texted me, asking if we could talk. She wanted to come back to the house, but I told her to meet me at a nearby park instead. I couldn't face the idea of discussing this in the home where our children lived, and where she had betrayed me. I arrived at the park early, pacing as I waited for her. The morning air was crisp, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. Finally, I saw her car pull up, and she got out, looking nervous and fragile. For a moment I felt a pang of the old affection I had for her, but it was quickly overshadowed by the enormity of her betrayal. She approached me, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Mike," she began, but I cut her off. "Save it, Karen. I want answers, not apologies," I said sharply. "How long has this been going on? How many times have you brought him into our home?" She looked down, unable to meet my eyes. "It started a few months ago. I only brought him to the house once last night. I swear, Mike, it was a mistake. I was lonely and he was there." "A mistake? A mistake is forgetting to buy milk, Karen. This was a choice. You chose to betray me, to betray our children, in the worst way possible," I shouted, my voice trembling with anger. "I know, and I'm sorry. I was just so lonely with you always gone. I didn't know how to deal with it," she said, tears streaming down her face. I scoffed. "Lonely? You think I wasn't lonely? You think I didn't miss you, miss our family? But I didn't cheat, Karen. I didn't destroy our family because of it. How could you do this to us, to our children?" She sobbed, her shoulders shaking. "I don't know, Mike. I don't know. I was weak. Please believe me, it didn't mean anything." "Stop saying that," I exploded. "It meant everything, Karen. It meant you were willing to throw away 15 years of marriage to hurt our children for what? For some cheap fling? How do you expect me to forgive that?" She was silent, her tears the only answer. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. "Our marriage is over, Karen. Nothing will ever be the same. I can't trust you, and I won't put our children through this. They deserve better than a home built on lies. Mike, please. We can go to counseling. We can work through this. I love you, I do. I made a horrible mistake, but I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose our family," she pleaded, her voice cracking. I shook my head. "It's too late for that. You've destroyed everything. Counseling won't change what you did, and it won't erase the pain you've caused. Our kids heard you, Karen. They know what happened. How do you expect to fix that?" She collapsed onto the park bench, her sobs echoing in the quiet morning. I felt a mixture of pity and anger, but I knew I had to stand firm. "I'll come by later to get the kids and explain things to them. They deserve to hear it from me." As for us, we'll talk to a lawyer and figure out the next steps. But don't think for a second that things will ever go back to the way they were. That life is over." Karen looked up at me, her face a mask of despair. "Mike, I love you. Please don't do this." I stared at her, feeling the finality of my decision settle in. "I loved you too, Karen, but you destroyed that love. There's no going back." With that, I turned and walked away, each step feeling like a step away from the life I once knew. As I got into my car, I allowed myself a moment to grieve for the family we had been, for the future that was now lost. But I knew I had to be strong, for myself and for my children. The road ahead would be tough, but it was a road I had to take. I drove to Steve's house, my heart heavy with the task ahead. When I arrived, Emily and Jake ran to me, their faces filled with worry. I hugged them tightly, feeling their small bodies tremble with fear and confusion. "Dad, what's going on?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath and looked into their eyes. "Kids, we need to talk. There's a lot we need to discuss, but I want you to know that no matter what happens, I love you both very much. We're going to get through this together." As I began to explain the situation to them, I knew that our lives had changed forever. The woman I had once loved and trusted had shattered our family, but I was determined to pick up the pieces and build a new future for myself and my children, no matter how painful the process might be. The following days were a blur of anger, sadness, and difficult conversations. I had to explain to Emily and Jake that their mother had made a terrible mistake and that our family was going to change. They cried, and so did I, but we faced it together. I moved back into the house while Karen stayed at a hotel. We began the painful process of figuring out the logistics of our separation. But amidst all this pain, anger simmered just below the surface, demanding an outlet. I couldn't stop thinking about Karen's lover, this Paul, who had invaded my life and shattered my family. I needed to do something to make them both feel a fraction of the pain I was going through. I reached out to Steve again, who had been my rock through this whole ordeal. "Steve, I need your help," I said, the resolve in my voice clear. "I need to find out who this Paul guy is and teach him a lesson." "Mike, are you sure about this? Revenge can be a dangerous path," Steve replied, concern evident in his voice. "I'm sure, Steve. I can't just let this go. He needs to know what he's done," I insisted, my anger fueling my determination. Steve sighed, but agreed to help. Over the next few days, we dug into Karen's phone records and messages. It didn't take long to find out more about Paul. He was a colleague of Karen's, recently divorced, and living alone in a small apartment on the other side of town. We gathered as much information as we could, planning our next move. One evening, I decided it was time. I left the kids with Steve, telling them I needed to take care of something important. My heart pounded with a mix of anger and adrenaline as I drove to Paul's apartment. The thought of confronting him face to face made my blood boil, but it also gave me a strange sense of purpose. I arrived at his apartment complex and found his unit easily. I stood outside his door for a moment, gathering my thoughts and calming my nerves. Then I knocked, my hand trembling slightly. After a few moments, the door opened, and there he was. Paul, the man who had torn my family apart. "Can I help you?" he asked, his face a mix of confusion and recognition. "Yeah, you can," I replied, my voice steady. "I'm Mike, Karen's husband." His eyes widened, and he took a step back. "Look, man, I didn't know—" "Save it," I snapped, stepping inside and closing the door behind me. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You knew she was married. You knew she had a family. And yet you still did this. Mike, I didn't let him finish. All the anger and hurt I had been bottling up erupted. I shoved him against the wall, my fists clenched. "You think you can just come into my life and destroy everything? You think there won't be consequences? Mike, please, I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen," he stammered, fear in his eyes. "Sorry doesn't cut it," I growled. I felt a surge of rage, and before I knew it, my fist connected with his face. He stumbled back, clutching his jaw. "You're going to regret this," I said, advancing on him. "You messed with the wrong family." He tried to defend himself, but I was too far gone. My fists flew, landing blow after blow. He didn't fight back, just took it, blood trickling from his nose and mouth. Finally, I stopped, panting heavily. Paul lay on the floor, groaning in pain. Stay away from my family, I said, my voice low and dangerous. If I ever see you near Karen or my kids again, I won't hold back. I turned and left, my knuckles throbbing and my mind reeling. As I drove back home, the initial satisfaction of revenge began to fade, replaced by a sense of emptiness. Had I really achieved anything? Paul had been punished, but the damage to my family was still there, raw and painful. When I got back to Steve's place, I washed up and checked on the kids. They were already asleep, their innocent faces a stark contrast to the chaos of my emotions. Steve sat with me in the living room, a knowing look in his eyes. Did it help? He asked quietly. I shook my head. No, not really. Revenge rarely does, Mike. But sometimes it feels like the only option, he said, patting my shoulder. I don't know what to do, Steve. I just want my life back, I said, my voice breaking. You'll get through this, Mike. One step at a time. Just focus on your kids and take care of yourself, he advised. I nodded, knowing he was right. The road ahead was still uncertain and filled with challenges, but I had to stay strong for Emily and Jake. Karen had betrayed us, but I wouldn't let her actions define our future. We would find a way to heal, no matter how long it took. The following weeks were some of the hardest of my life. Karen and I spoke only when necessary, and every conversation was filled with tension and regret. I couldn't bear to look at her without feeling a surge of anger and betrayal. Despite everything, we needed to sort out the details of our separation and what it meant for the kids. I reached out to a divorce attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Rachel, who came highly recommended by Steve. Rachel was tough and experienced, exactly what I needed to navigate this mess. She walked me through the process, explaining the steps we needed to take to ensure a fair settlement. Mike, we'll file for divorce on the grounds of adultery. Given the circumstances, you have a strong case, Rachel said, her voice firm but compassionate. I just want this over with, I replied, the exhaustion clear in my voice. We'll get through it. Focus on your kids, and let me handle the legalities, she assured me. I filed for divorce the next day. The papers were served to Karen at her office, a public declaration of our broken marriage. She called me that evening, her voice trembling. Mike, we need to talk. Can we meet somewhere private? She asked. Fine. Meet me at the house in an hour, I replied, my tone cold. I arrived home first, the house feeling emptier than ever. When Karen walked in, I could see the toll the past few weeks had taken on her. She looked tired and worn, but I felt no sympathy. She had brought this upon herself. Mike, I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, but please, can we try to handle this amicably? For the kids' sake, she pleaded, her eyes filled with tears. I want what's best for Emily and Jake, but that doesn't mean I'll go easy on you, I said, my voice hard. You destroyed our family, Karen. I can't forgive that. I understand. I'll agree to whatever terms you want, but please don't make this harder for the kids than it has to be, she begged. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my anger in check. I want full custody. You can have visitation rights, but the kids will live with me. They need stability, and right now, you can't provide that. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Okay. I just want to see them. I know I messed up, but I love them, Mike. I love them so much. Love isn't enough, Karen. You need to prove that you can be a responsible parent. You need to rebuild their trust, I said, my tone softening slightly. I will, Mike. I'll do whatever it takes, she vowed. We discussed the details of our separation, dividing our assets, and agreeing on a financial settlement. Karen would move into a smaller apartment nearby to be close to the kids. It was a painful and emotional conversation, but it was necessary to move forward. The next day, we sat down with Rachel and Karen's attorney to finalize the divorce agreement. The process was formal and clinical, a stark contrast to the emotional chaos of our personal lives. Karen agreed to my terms without protest, and we signed the papers that officially ended our marriage. As we left the attorney's office, Karen turned to me, her eyes red and swollen. Mike, I'm so sorry. I wish I could take it all back. I know you do, Karen, but we can't change the past. We can only try to move forward, I replied, feeling a hollow emptiness inside. Back home, I broke the news to Emily and Jake. They took it as well as could be expected, but I could see the hurt and confusion in their eyes. We're still a family, I reassured them. Things will be different, but we'll get through this together. Karen and I made an effort to co-parent effectively, putting our children's needs above our own pain. She visited regularly, and I made sure the kids maintained a relationship with their mother, despite my personal feelings. One evening, as I was tucking Emily into bed, she looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes. "Daddy, will things ever be the same again?" I swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "No, sweetheart. Things won't be the same. But that doesn't mean they can't be good again. We'll make new memories and find new ways to be happy." She nodded, her small hand gripping mine. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, Emily." "Always," I replied, my heart aching for the loss of our once perfect family. The road ahead was uncertain and filled with challenges, but I knew we would find a way to rebuild our lives. The divorce was a painful but necessary step towards healing, and I was determined to create a stable and loving environment for my children. As I lay in bed that night, I allowed myself to hope for a future where we could all find peace and happiness again, despite the scars left by Karen's betrayal. Months passed, and the raw pain of Karen's betrayal began to dull, replaced by a cautious sense of optimism. Life settled into a new routine, one that centered around my children and their well-being. We adjusted to our new normal, and slowly, the wounds started to heal. Emily and Jake were remarkably resilient. They continued to excel in school and sports, and our home was filled with laughter and love once more. Karen and I maintained a civil co-parenting relationship, focused on doing what was best for the kids. She had started therapy and was making efforts to rebuild her relationship with Emily and Jake, one step at a time. Despite the progress, I couldn't ignore the emptiness that lingered. I'd lost not only a wife, but also the sense of security and trust that came with our marriage. I spent a lot of time reflecting on what had happened, trying to understand my own role in the disintegration of our relationship. Therapy helped, giving me a space to process my emotions and gain clarity. One Saturday morning, I decided to take the kids to the local farmer's market. It was a bright, sunny day, and I wanted to make the most of it. As we wandered through the stalls, Emily and Jake ran ahead, excitedly exploring the various stands. "Dad, look at these flowers!" Emily exclaimed, pointing to a colorful display. "Let's get some for the house," Jake suggested, his eyes wide with excitement. We picked out a bouquet of bright sunflowers and continued to explore. As we reached the end of the market, I noticed a small stall selling homemade candles. A woman stood behind the counter, arranging the display. She looked up as we approached, and our eyes met. She had a warm, friendly smile that immediately put me at ease. "Good morning. Would you like to smell some of our candles?" she asked, her voice cheerful. "Sure," I replied, smiling back. Emily and Jake eagerly sampled the various scents, chattering excitedly about their favorites. The woman introduced herself as Laura and told us about her passion for making candles. We struck up a conversation, and I found myself genuinely enjoying her company. As we were about to leave, Laura handed me a small candle. "This one's on the house. It's a new scent I'm trying out. Let me know what you think," she said with a wink. "Thank you, Laura. We'll definitely give it a try," I replied, feeling a warmth in my chest that had been absent for a long time. Over the next few weeks, we returned to the farmer's market regularly. Laura and I became friends, our conversations growing longer and more personal. She was kind, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in my life and my children. I found myself looking forward to our encounters, a small spark of hope igniting within me. One afternoon, after the market had closed, Laura invited us to her candle-making workshop. Emily and Jake were thrilled, and I couldn't refuse their eager faces. We spent the day creating our own candles, laughing and enjoying each other's company. As the kids worked on their projects, Laura and I talked about our lives, our dreams, and our fears. "I can't imagine what you've been through," Laura said softly, her eyes filled with empathy. "But you're doing an amazing job with your kids. They're wonderful." "Thank you, Laura. It hasn't been easy, but we're getting there," I replied, feeling a connection growing between us. As the sun began to set, we sat outside the workshop, watching Emily and Jake play in the garden. Laura turned to me, her expression serious. "Mike, I know it's not my place, but I think you're an incredible person. You deserve to be happy," she said, her voice gentle. I looked at her, my heart pounding. I haven't felt this way in a long time, Laura. You've brought something back into my life that I thought I'd lost forever. She smiled, her eyes shining. I'm glad, because you've done the same for me. Our relationship blossomed from that moment. Laura became a part of our lives, her warmth and kindness a balm to our wounded hearts. She was patient, understanding the complexities of my situation and never pushing for more than I could give. Emily and Jake adored her, and she embraced them with open arms. As the months turned into a year, I realized that I had found something precious. Laura and I had built a relationship based on trust, respect, and genuine affection. It was different from what I had with Karen, but it was something I cherished deeply. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, I took Laura's hand in mine. I never thought I'd find happiness again, I said, my voice filled with emotion. But you've given me hope, Laura. You've shown me that it's possible to rebuild, to love again. She squeezed my hand, her eyes filled with love. We've both been through a lot, Mike, but we have a chance to create something beautiful together. Life after Karen's betrayal was not what I had imagined, but it was a new beginning. I had learned to forgive, to heal, and to open my heart again. The scars of the past would always be there, but they no longer defined me. I had found strength in my children, in my friends, and in myself. As I looked at Laura, I knew that our journey was just beginning. We had a future filled with possibilities, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a deep sense of peace. The past was behind us, and together, we were ready to embrace whatever lay ahead.